Every serious outboard test in the last 5 years has ended with the same uncomfortable sentence. The diesel wins on the numbers. Not narrowly, not on a technicality. Independent testers, commercial fleet managers, and military procurement officers keep arriving at the same conclusion. On fuel burn, on torque, on service life, on range, on fire safety, the diesel outboard beats the gasoline outboard that has defined the industry for 50 years. And yet Yamaha does not build one. Mercury does not build one for the general market. Honda does not. Suzuki does not. 2 small companies build them. One is Swedish, one is British. Between them, they spent more than 25 years and hundreds of millions of dollars solving a problem the 4 biggest names in outboard manufacturing publicly described as not worth solving. So, which is it? Did the experts find the future of boating bolted to a transom in Sweden? Or did the majors already run the math and quietly decide the experts are wrong? Both stories are true, and the gap between them is where every boater's next engine purchase gets decided. To understand why the experts are impressed, you have to understand what they are looking at. A conventional outboard is not really an engine design. It is a packaging solution. The powerhead sits vertically behind the cowling, above the waterline, and sends its power straight down a long drive shaft to a gear case and a propeller below the surface. Everything about that layout, the height, the weight distribution, the cooling, the exhaust routing, was optimized around one thing: a light, high-revving gasoline engine. Diesel does not fit that box. Diesel powerheads are heavier because compression ignition needs stronger blocks, heavier cranks, and higher injection pressures. They make their power low in the rev range instead of high. They demand different cooling and different exhaust geometry. Drop a diesel into a vertical outboard architecture, and you get an engine that is too heavy, too tall, and too hard on a drive shaft designed for half the torque. Every major manufacturer reached the same verdict. If a boat needs diesel, put the diesel inside the hull. That answer worked for the industry. It did not work for the operators. Inboard diesel installations eat cabin space, require shaft drives and stuffing boxes, restrict hull design, and turn routine service into a contortion act instead of flipping open a cowling. So a real market sat there, unserved for decades. Military fleets that wanted one fuel for their trucks and their boats. Commercial fishermen who wanted torque for hauling and range for distant grounds. Wind farm support crews running continuous duty cycles offshore. Pilot boats, patrol boats, rescue craft. Vessels measured in operating hours, not weekends. The majors looked at that market, added up the engineering bill, and walked away. 2 companies did not. The Swedish answer came from a company founded in 2012 under the name Simco Marine, which built its outboard around the Swedish word for ox. The engineering philosophy matched the name. Instead of forcing a diesel into a vertical layout, Oxy mounted it horizontally, the same orientation it has in a passenger car, and threw out the geared drive shaft entirely. Power leaves the engine through a patented belt and pulley transmission, running to a heavy-duty gearbox and out to the propeller shaft. The belt drive is not a compromise. It is what allows the engine to handle load levels a conventional outboard driveline would not survive. The powerheads are automotive. The 125 through 200 horsepower models use a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder. The flagship Oxy 300 uses a 3-liter turbocharged inline-6 from BMW. First production engines arrived in 2014. The British answer was the opposite approach entirely. Cox Marine fired its first concept engine in 2010 and refused to adapt anything. The CX-0300 is a 4.4-liter twin-turbocharged VB8, purpose-built for marine use from a blank sheet, mounted vertically like a conventional outboard, so it drops onto a standard transom with standard steering. No truck block, no car block. The company has described the development cost as roughly $200 million over more than a decade. It entered production in 2020, and a 350 horsepower variant followed. 2 philosophies: redesign the outboard around the engine, or redesign the engine around the outboard. Both produced something the majors said would not be worth building. And when the test data started coming back, The reason the majors avoided this category stopped looking like engineering caution and started looking like something else. Start with fuel, because that is where the expert consensus is strongest. Oxy states its diesel outboards burn up to 46% less fuel than a comparable gasoline outboard, and puts the realistic operational range at 30 to 40% depending on application, with the largest gains at wide-open throttle. Cox claims up to 30% better fuel efficiency against a 300 horsepower gasoline outboard, with independent testing reported in the range of 30 to 35% at cruise. Those are two different companies, two completely different engineering approaches, and two independent sets of testing arriving in the same territory. That convergence is why the experts take the numbers seriously. Then, torque. Oxy rates the 300 at 945 Newton meters at the propeller shaft. Cox rates the CXO 300 at 480 pound-feet, which the company describes as roughly 26% more than an equivalent 300 horsepower gasoline outboard. Diesel makes that torque low in the rev range, which is exactly where a working boat lives. Heavy loads, slow speed maneuvering, bollard pull, pushing a fully loaded hull onto plane. Then service life. Cox quotes service intervals up to 250 hours against roughly 100 hours for a typical gasoline outboard, a service life it describes as around 3 times an average outboard, and backs the engine with a 5-year recreational warranty or an 18-month 1,500-hour commercial warranty. Oxy's whole product argument is built on the phrase endurance by engineering, inboard-grade durability in an outboard package. Then range. Burn 30 to 40% less fuel, and the same tank carries the boat dramatically further. For an offshore fishing platform, a long-range cruiser, or a support vessel operating where gasoline is hard to find, that is not an efficiency statistic. It is a change in what the boat is capable of doing. Then safety, the argument recreational boaters underrate, and every commercial and military operator ranks near the top. Diesel has a far higher flash point than gasoline. It does not produce explosive vapor in a bilge. For a fleet, that single property changes insurance, changes fuel handling procedure, and changes crew risk. And then emissions. Oxy states that its 300 running on HVO 100 renewable diesel produces up to a 92% reduction in carbon dioxide compared with a gasoline equivalent, based on the company's own testing. Cox has certified the CXO 300 to EPA Tier 3, RCD2, IMO2, and BSO2, 6 categories. The diesel wins or ties in all 6. So why is almost nobody buying one? Because the expert verdict has a footnote, and the footnote is brutal. The first problem is price. A 300 horsepower diesel outboard lands in a completely different price universe from its gasoline rival. Figures quoted in the US market have run from roughly $55,000 to well north of $70,000 for a single engine, against something closer to $25,000 to $30,000 for a Yamaha F300. That is a premium that only pays back through hours burned. A commercial operator running 1,000 hours a year clears the gap in a few seasons. A recreational owner running 100 hours a year does not clear it inside a normal ownership cycle. The second problem is weight. A 300 horsepower diesel outboard runs several hundred pounds heavier than its gasoline equivalent. The Oxy 300 has been quoted between roughly 870 and 960 pounds, depending on shaft and configuration, against about 550 pounds for a Yamaha F300. On a triple installation that is close to another 1,000 pounds hanging off the transom. Commercial hulls are designed for it. Most recreational hulls are not, and the conversation ends before price is ever discussed. The third problem is the network. Yamaha, Mercury, Honda, and Suzuki have decades of dealer infrastructure, parts distribution, and factory-trained technicians in nearly every coastal market. Diesel outboard service is concentrated where commercial fleets are. That gap became visible in 2024 when Mac Boring, an early Oxy investor and its U.S. distributor since 2015, the company that secured the first U.S. Coast Guard orders after a joint research project in 2017, announced it was discontinuing its representation of the brand effective immediately. And the fourth problem is the one that should worry any buyer most: the health of the companies themselves. Oxy Marine's most recent quarterly results show net turnover of 15.5 million Swedish crowns, around $1.6 million, down sharply from 61 million crowns in the same quarter a year earlier, with a consolidated net loss of 27 million crowns. Gross margin actually improved to 40%, and the chief executive attributed the collapse in turnover to delays in the United States. But those are the numbers of a company running on technological credibility rather than commercial momentum. Cox Marine, by contrast, has spent 2026 expanding, renewing its European distribution agreements across Scandinavia, Germany, Poland, the Benelux, and Italy, and extending its U.S. distributors' territory across 9 additional southern states. The technology is proven. The businesses carrying it are not equally safe bets. And when an engine costs $60,000 and needs parts for a decade, that distinction is not academic. Which brings the story back to the 4 companies that could end this argument tomorrow. The first reason they don't is structural. Yamaha, Mercury, Honda, and Suzuki have spent decades building supply chains, supplier relationships, dealer networks, and technician training programs around gasoline platforms. Pivoting any one of them toward diesel means rebuilding all 4 of those things at once to compete in a segment already occupied by specialists. The second reason is financial, and it is the one nobody says out loud. The majors earn significant recurring revenue from the aftermarket ecosystem around gasoline engines, oils, filters, fuel additives, replacement components, proprietary diagnostics, all flowing through dealer networks long after the engine sale. A diesel platform with 250-hour service intervals and a 10,000-hour service life cannibalizes that revenue without an obvious replacement at the same margin. The third reason is the customer pyramid. Volume lives in the recreational segment, where price sensitivity is high and weekend usage makes the diesel payback impossible. The commercial segment, where diesel economics work, is a much thinner slice of industry revenue. The majors optimize for volume, and volume does not reward this engineering. But 3 pressures are moving against that logic every year. Marine fuel costs keep climbing, which drops the break-even hours where diesel starts to pay. Emissions rules keep tightening in European waters and in California, which turns a renewable diesel-compatible engine from a curiosity into a compliance asset. And boats keep getting bigger, with owners running longer trips and more hours, pushing recreational buyers toward the usage profile that used to belong only to fleets. None of those pressures reverses. All of them compound. So does this engine change everything? For a weekend owner running 100 hours a season on a bay boat? No. The price gap is real, the weight is real, and the service network is thin. The experts who say otherwise are quoting fleet economics to a recreational buyer. For anyone who measures a boat in operating hours rather than weekends, commercial, military, charter, offshore support, long-range cruising, it already has. The engine that was declared impossible is on transoms, logging thousands of hours, saving 6 figures a year on fuel for operators who run hard enough to notice. That is how every propulsion shift in this industry has happened. 2-stroke to 4-stroke started at the commercial edge and worked inward. Electronic fuel injection did the same. So did the pivot from stern drive to outboard. Each one was led by a smaller player willing to risk what the incumbents would not. And each one eventually reshaped the market the incumbents thought they controlled. The boat sitting in the driveway today was designed around a gasoline outboard. The question is not whether diesel is better. The test data settled that. The question is, how long the 4 biggest manufacturers in the industry can keep defending a platform that gets harder to defend every year, and which one of them blinks first.